Hi folks, welcome to this TPC webinar series. It's Wednesday, 5 ways to make website analytics work for ticketing. Sorry for this slightly delayed start. We just had a few tech gremlins to sort out. Just a bit of a plug, tomorrow and Friday. Tomorrow is Andrew Sharp, ticketing from home. If you've got staff processing credit card numbers or handling customer data at home, some things you really need to consider there privacy-wise. That's tomorrow at 3 o'clock, not our usual 2 o'clock start time. And on Friday, the big one, Katie Rains with her National Audience Survey Week 3 results. That's got over 330 registrations already for that one. So that's coming up towards the end of the week. We'll be underway shortly, just waiting for a few of you to join, and then we'll be underway. Hey, so we seem to have pretty much everyone, the numbers have leveled out. So yes, today is latest of our TPC webinar series, 5 ways to make website analytics work for ticketing. And today's speaker is Chris Unitt, and welcome one, welcome all. We had a bit of a fun with this one. So Chris and I went through the registered list and looked at the organisations represented and thought we'd do a bit of a flag game. So there's 5 countries there. Anyone who could answer me which 5 of those correctly in the Q&A gets a lovely shiny TPC 2020 badge, of which I have 350 unused, of course. But onwards and upwards. Yes, today, a bit of housekeeping. If you've been on one of these before, the same format. Will be about 45 to 60 minutes. We are recording the session, so if you have to nip off, kid interruptions, schooling needs, etc., you will get a link and the ability to watch this back on demand. There'll be a presentation by Chris, some discussion points, a Q&A, and then a post-webinar survey as well. But with the joy of technology, we thought we'd just start off before I hand over to Chris with a quick poll. Which is, let's see if I can launch it. There you go. Have you passed the Google Analytics individual qualifications? Yes, no, or never heard of it? Wow, votes piling in there. Okay, it's almost everyone. Last couple, and that's almost everyone. Can you see that, Chris?
I can, yes.
Look at that. Yeah, no, 44%. Never heard of it, 43%. Yes, 14%. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing that and hand over to Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just pop up some slides for us to look at. Oh, starting at the end, that's classy. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. That poll result was brilliant news for me, because if you're all experts on this, then you'll probably be rolling your eyes halfway through what I'm about to say. But hopefully there's something here for those of you who do have the certification. This is going to be a stripped down version of the talk that I was going to give at in Birmingham a few weeks back, but just keeping all the good bits mostly. So just very quickly about me. I mean, you've probably read my bio on the TPC website. My name's Chris. That's what I look like standing outside of a theatre for added credibility. Most people go with bookshelves behind them. I've got a theatre behind me. I run a little outfit called One Further. We do digital analytics and user research, mostly for organisations across the cultural sector. So Logo Salad, these are the people that we've worked with, some of the people that we've worked with this year. lots of lovely people in there. So, oh, it's also, like, technically it's One Further's 6th birthday today, so I won't be going out to celebrate tonight. So I wanted to give you an idea of sort of where I'm coming from. This is the kind of experience I've got with across this sector. Lots of people who sell a lot of stuff online, a lot of tickets, a lot of merchandise, a lot of memberships and donations as well, using an awful lot of different platforms to do so. So where we're going to be talking here about getting website analytics to work for ticketing, there are all sorts of interesting little bumps and complications. Ticketing is just a different beast to other types of e-commerce. So what I'm going to go through over the next sort of 40 minutes-ish is essentially my wish list, and things that would make my life an awful lot easier in the work that I do, and would therefore make my clients' lives a lot easier. We're going to look at some things looking at what ticketing providers can do. We're going to look at web agencies and the part that they can play, and in-house teams as well. This is what I imagine all my clients look like. With the in-house teams also being able to drive requirements from their ticketing providers and web agencies as well, of course. And the reason that I've split this across those 3 broad cohorts is that, in the words of the GDS team, user research and also web analytics and marketing analytics and all sorts of other things is a team sport. These things can't be done in isolation by one person or team alone, although goodness knows sometimes try to make that work. To explain what I mean, here's a little illustration. We've got this chap here. He is looking ahead probably a fair few months now, trying to book himself a ticket to something on his laptop. His online behavior and the interactions on the website and the purchases generate data. That data is sent to all sorts of places. So Google Analytics, Google Ads, Facebook Ads, Hotjar as another user experience evaluation tool, and various other places as well. And then off the back of that, usually the in-house teams have got some decisions to make on the data that comes in from that, and the tools themselves will use that data for automation as well. So all of this is used to drive improved user experience. It's also to understand marketing performance, so how channels are resulting in goals being carried out on those websites, and also content performance. And when I talk about content performance, that might be how well articles or videos are performing. It might be how persuasive a production page is, how easily what's on listings are able to help surface information and relevant events for people. And the end goal of this, like if you just go down the 5 whys, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? The end result of this is meant to be happy people who can get tickets to the experience that they want, and happy organizations because they're not leaving money on the table, seeing people leave. Now, to hop back a bit as well, the key thing about this is that the ability of organizations to make good decisions based on their data entirely depends on what's happening upstream of them. So if the website isn't providing useful enough data, or it's providing inconsistent data, or there's some sort of other problem, then that data is not going to get into Google Analytics, ads, Facebook ads, what have you. Those tools aren't going to be able to do their automation, and the people's ability to make decisions is going to be compromised. And we don't want that at all. I also This, in simpler times, was the photo that I always went to, just to get across to people the importance of digital analytics and the purpose of it as well. So we can see from just from this one photo, we can see at a rough glance how many people there are in this space. We can see on the right-hand side, we can see a snaking queue going up to people, presumably buying tickets for exhibitions. Just below them, we can see people looking for, they're looking at directions, they're lost, trying to find their way around. On the far left-hand side, we've got people who are looking at displays and content. We've got down the right at the bottom, we've got a lady there who might need some sort of assistance in two ways. Like the first time I saw this, I thought that is a lady with a pushchair at the bottom of some stairs, might need some assistance. But secondly, I've no idea where the child is. I have stared at this quite a lot, and there are no unaccounted for children around. So two possible things that they need assistance with. So the corollary of this digitally is that we can have front of house staff standing there and looking at what's going on here and seeing if anyone has problems. If everyone's tripping up over something, or people are leaving that queue in droves because they're getting bored, or people are trying to get through doorways that aren't really doorways, or it's just far too crowded or empty in there. There are steps that could be taken and would be taken very quickly to solve that. With our digital spaces, our websites, ticketing flows, we can't just stand there and see by people's expressions on their faces, are they having a good time? Are they doing what they're trying to do? We need other tools to give us that vantage point. And so that's what things like Google Analytics, Hotjar, and various other tools can give us. The other thing just to mention, so I'm going to talk a lot about Google Analytics because it's one of the richest sources of information about what's happening on a website, and I would venture to guess that 99% of ticketed organizations are using it. Google Analytics isn't without its problems, and there are a few reasons for this. So firstly, it's been built for the needs of millions and millions of websites out there. It's not been custom built for venues that are selling tickets. It has a slightly restrictive view of how e-commerce happens on a website, with ticketing purchase pathways being what they are. Once you've gone through ticket select and select your own seat, and upsells and memberships, subscriptions, multi-buys, and all the rest of it, Google's standard way of looking at things sort of is bursting at the seams. So there are some things that we need to do to account for that. The other thing to bear in mind is that user behavior generally tends to be a little bit all over the place. Google Analytics was built in a much simpler kind of time. If you've ever been through a website building exercise, you start off with sort of very straightforward user mapping kind of things. You might have something like this. So a typical theatre might have a very simplified customer journey where someone starts on the home page, goes to what's on, finds their production page, and then to buy the tickets, they select the date, select the seats, either sign in or register, give some personal details, pay, and then get to the confirmation page. In reality, nobody really does anything like that. They'll view several productions, or they'll hop backwards and forwards between select seats and select a date. They might add things to their basket, so as a reminder, so that when they come back later that day, they can check out. It's not as neat as the tools might want us to believe. So that's all complicated, but that's just what makes it fun. So what I'm going to start with, so I've got 5 ways to make web analytics work for ticketing. I'm going to start with the first two are going to be aimed at the ticketing providers and the web agencies. So for the in-house people, this is where you kind of you prod them and say, ooh, we want that, please. So number one, I would love to be able to get better data from ticketing providers. And so this comes in various flavors. So firstly, the e-commerce data. So when people get to the order confirmation page, what happens is that websites will typically store a load of information about how much money the person has just spent and what products they bought. When I say products, I could mean tickets, merchandise, donations, memberships, anything that could be sold. In e-commerce parlance, it's just a product. I would love that to be in the enhanced e-commerce format, which we'll talk about in a second. And I would like additional control over how that information comes through. So just very, there's code on the next page, next slide, I do warn you. The Google Analytics e-commerce data comes in two flavors. There is standard on the left-hand side, there is enhanced on the right. If you're not really into code, don't worry about it. This is actually really simple. If we pick down the left-hand side, transaction ID is just the order ID. Affiliation, where was the thing bought for? Transaction total is how much they spent. You can figure out the rest. Transaction products. If we look through that, we can see that this was a ticket for Romeo and Juliet. Two of them priced $19.99. This SKU is just an ID number. So, and then there's another product underneath, the donation to the Actors Fund for £3. There was one of those. It's fairly simple, really. That's the standard, and quite a lot of ticketing systems, not all of them, put that information in the standard format. On the right-hand side, we've got the enhanced format. It's the same information with a couple of extra little bits. But enhanced e-commerce allows us to do all sorts of lovely extra things with the data that we're getting through on our websites. This is why one gets a red cross and the other gets a lovely big green tick. So the fundamental part about this is that standard e-commerce thinks about what is happening on your website in terms of pages that have been viewed and products that have been bought. So if you've got a production page for Romeo and Juliet, you can see how many times that has been viewed. And then you can pootle over to your product performance reports in Google Analytics and see how many times a Romeo and Juliet product has been bought. But fundamentally, they're different concepts. One is a web page, one is a product. And Google Analytics can't tie the two together. It has no idea what the link is between the product page, production page in this case, and the product, the ticket. With enhanced e-commerce, it totally flips how Google Analytics looks at what is on your website. So instead of taking a page-centric view to your website, it's looking at a much more product-centric view. So it can tell you on the basis of a single product, so in this case, the Romeo and Juliet ticket, how many times was that production viewed in, say, a what's on list or a homepage or a you may also like recommendation block. It can tell you how many times that production page, the product detail page, was viewed. It can tell you how many times that product was added to basket, removed from it, or bought. That starts to give you much more interesting things like from this production page, we know how many times it's been viewed, how many times was this product then added to the basket. That gives you a conversion rate for your production pages, which is really useful. It can also tell you from the number of people who've looked at that page, what percentage of people bought it. Gives you so much more information about how those production pages are working for you. Are they persuasive? Are they giving people the information they need? Are we driving good quality traffic to them? Ties those things together much better. The other thing about enhanced e-commerce is that quite a lot of organizations are using separate systems for things like, especially online shops. So Shopify is the big one. A lot of these other third-party systems are using enhanced e-commerce data. So quite often we're in a situation where I'm working with the client, and every other system they're using is getting data in the enhanced e-commerce format, except the ticketing system, which then means we have to jump through hoops, doing some crazy stuff in using Google Tag Manager to pick up the standard stuff, translate it into enhanced, and then send it off to the website, which is, I'd rather put my feet up than do that over and over again, to be honest. So that's the first thing. So that unlocks quite a lot. So I'd love that to happen. That would make things a lot easier. The other thing that would be really useful is, this is probably the least sexy slide in the entire presentation, more control over the fields that are populated in on that confirmation page. So I keep having to do horrible spreadsheets like this. So where the product name isn't the name of the exhibition or event, or the product category just doesn't make sense. It's so in this case, this is for the some work that we're doing for the V&A, where they're revamping their system at the moment. We've got the product category for tickets is what's on museum events. Skip over to column G, the new version of this. The category is going to be ticket. It's going to make so much more sense, and then be broken down by exhibition or event or subtypes of event. We're actually on this project, the system that we're using allows us to choose what information is going to come through in each of the fields. So we can decide what the product name or the product category or other fields like brand and variant are going to be. So that's just a dream to me. That's really good. A couple of other things that be really useful to have, error messages. Anytime an error message is shown to a user, that is something that we'd like to be able to pick up. This can be done in a slightly bodgy workaround kind of approach, but it's really useful to know how many times error messages are being shown to your users. I've got a client that every time I bought a ticket on their site as a test transaction, I hit this error every time. It was a bit of the UI that just wasn't intuitive. And I thought, well, if I keep buying tickets and I hit it every time, I wonder what everyone else is doing. We set up some tracking to work out how many times is this error being shown to users. And we figured that, we discovered that it was about 50% of users were being shouted at for using the website wrong. That is not a problem with the user. Any time you are shouted at by a website is not a good thing. So knowing how many people are making what types of errors on your website will give you really useful insight into what you can make easier for people or explain for people better, and try and remove some of the hurdles from their way. Picking up and spotting those errors is tricky, but there are ways to do it. And the same for any other interactions people are doing on websites. Interacting with upsells, clicking on view from seat, changing the view on select your own seat, all sorts of interesting things that we could work out how people are using this functionality, but it's usually quite tricky. And then also it would be lovely to know if people were going through these systems as logged in users or guest users. Are they members or are they not? This information is quite useful from a Google Analytics point of view, where we can segment different types of user and see if people are behaving in different ways. But it's also useful information for things like basket recovery, emails or ads that you're serving. There's all sorts of uses for this data. So that's having that information, that richer, more relevant information, would mean that we could get a better understanding of what's happening in those checkout flows. And then secondly, better data from the web agencies side of things as well. because websites are built bespoke for the most part, where we're involved with projects on the analytics side, it does give us the ability to stick our oar in and say, oh, can you surface this information? Can you make this trackable? I'll give you some examples of the things that we're looking at here. So e-commerce data, if enhanced e-commerce is being used, then that means that we can mark up the product detail pages, so the production pages, so that they can be matched up with the products people are buying. And the product list pages, which are our what's on pages, anytime productions are listed on home pages or as recommended events, that would need marking up by the developers so that we can pull that into Google Analytics. But then there's all sorts of other stuff about these pages. So metadata, information about the production that would be really useful to have in Google Analytics. So on sale status, is it upcoming, past, sold out, limited availability? Genre would be useful. So you could, in Google Analytics, very easily filter your music from your theatre, from your opera, from your comedy, if you've got a multi-art form venue. If you've got different venues around the place, that'd be useful. There's all sorts of interesting things. I'll give you a more concrete example of this. So this is so a client of mine, Oxford Playhouse. I look after their digital marketing activity. So one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to be able to use remarketing adverts for anyone. So if we were promoting this Adam Buxton show, then we can retarget people who have come to this page, but actually if we want to retarget people at a broader level, so anyone who has seen a comedy show, seen a production page that's in the comedy genre, we want to know about that. If we only want to target adverts at people who have looked at main stage productions, or if we just want to compare page views for main stage shows. And also on sale, behavior of production pages varies massively depending on whether a show is on sale or not. If it's a past show, we don't care about how many page views it is or isn't getting anymore. If something's not on sale anymore, we don't want to be doing remarketing for it. It's pointless. So at the moment, what I'm having to do is jump through hoops to try and get this information into Google Analytics or Facebook ads by scraping bits of the page. Ideally, what we do is have this information contained in, it's called a data layer object. It's a little bit of code that just lives in the lives on the page that tools like Google Tag Manager can look at and hoover up the information in there and send it into Google Analytics or send it off to Facebook ads or what have you. It gives you much richer information about what's what people are looking at on pages, which you won't get. So Google Analytics, as standard, will pick up your URL and your page title, and that's about it. But this is the meat of the interesting stuff about this this production that we could be using. I'd also, so a page like this, if I've got my user experience hat on, then I want to know about things like that calendar widget. This is a show that's happening on a single date. Is anyone using that calendar widget? That limited availability button is the call to action to enter the booking flow. If we put a book now button next to that, would that get clicked more than something that just said limited availability? Does that look enough like a button? I'd really want to test that, because if I'm giving anyone a shadow of doubt about what to do on this page, then that's a bad thing. That people who booked also booked for section, so that's a product list. So I'd want to be tracking that using enhanced e-commerce to find out if people are clicking on those things and booking them. Hopefully there are them, but maybe not. And is that other genres thing useful? Are people interacting with this stuff, or is it clutter on the page that could be used to to reduce the cognitive load on people who are trying to do stuff. So to do that, I might be able to track interactions just using what's on the page already, but working with a web developer would make that a little bit easier to do. So there are other types of user behavior as well. So things like what's on event filters, if there are any error messages, again, then that'd be wonderful. So that's our, so that's the upstream kind of stuff. So if we can get this kind of rich data, then it means that in-house teams are going to have more to work with. So at this point, we're on to our third one. We've got another poll.
That means a poll, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
There we go. Time for a poll. Keeps you awake. Let's have a look.
Especially as I've just been talking about all the technical stuff. So
is that appearing?
No, I can see it.
Good, good. Hopefully, yes, the votes. I can see the votes flooding in. So when was the last time you watched a customer use your website? And I'm saying this because it doesn't record them, or when we put these back on demand, it doesn't show this in the recording. So we're just having people vote now. And last couple, when was the last time you watched a customer use your website? This year, last year, longer, never, or not applicable? And I think that's it. So share the results. This year, 38%, last year, 16%, longer 10%, never 31%, not applicable 5%.
That's not terrible.
It's not the worst, is it?
It's not terrible.
Over to you.
Not amazing, but it's not terrible. Cool, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for filling that in. So there are tools and processes to have involved in when you're working with analytics, and so I've split this up across. So we've got various organisations, various different sizes here today. So at the very basic level, I would expect in terms of tools for people to have Google Analytics and to be conducting some sort of user research. User research might be as simple as sitting down in a cafe, like back when this was a thing that people could do, or hopping on a Zoom or Skype call with someone and asking them to do something on your website. It's very, very simple to do, and is usually very eye-opening as well. So at the basic level, everyone can do that. That's free and simple. It just requires a little bit of time. At the intermediate level, I'd expect you to be doing that, but also you're going to be at a level where using Google Tag Manager to pick up more granular data on how people are interacting with your website and to fire different tags on your pages to send data to a range of different tools. That's where that comes in. And it's also going to be well worth doing some sort of voice of customer data collection. I'll give you an example of that in a second. And then at the more advanced level, to be honest, my clients don't tend to be at this kind of level. Some of them are kind of nudging their way there, but you're more likely to be using Google Analytics 360, which is the premium paid version of Google Analytics. It's a 6-figure sum per year, if you want a bit of context, and just to think how much the free one gives you and how it's not all that bad, really. It might also be at this stage that you're starting to send your data through to a data warehouse so that you can match your web analytics data up with other sources of information, usually your back office and ticketing stuff. But also data from your marketing platforms, footfall data, could be all sorts of things that you match up there with some sort of ETL pipeline. So I've gone blank on what the L stands for, but extract, transform, damn it. Which is the process of having feeding that data into your data warehouse so that you can load. Thank you. so that you can send your data through to somewhere where you can start to do this mixing, matching, and deeper dives into analysis of what's going on. So these are the kind of a really rough idea of the kind of tools that you might be using. In terms of process, that's going to differ depending on size as well. But I would expect just some from kind of low-level dashboards and occasional reports through to programs of regular user research. If you've got a website project going on, then I would, if you're really walking the walk of saying that you're user-focused, then putting something in front of real people every couple of weeks or so. Actually, the Government Digital Service is quite good on this. They've got, I think they do some sort of, they have some requirements on how often people are supposed to look at real people using their websites. Kind of, it's a little bit like, you know, signs on construction sites, you know, like 10 days since last accident. It's kind of however many days you've been since you've actually seen a user using your website. Actually, if people wore badges saying that in meetings, you'd be able to filter out the people who didn't know what they were talking about. Anyway, in terms of voice of customer, I'm a really big fan of a very simple survey format that usually called customer effort score. So this is the one where on a confirmation page, and this is using just a very simple survey on Hotjar. Pops up when someone's bought something, just asks them to say, so completing this transaction was simple and straightforward. To what extent do you agree with that? So strongly agree down to strongly disagree. And is there anything that could have worked better for you? So I did this for a client who relaunched. It was actually it was a museum's online shop. And so we did a quick snapshot just before it went live. I say quick, we didn't get a huge amount of responses to it, but that gives you an idea. So most people had an all right time, then strongly agree or agree, with a fair few neutrals, a fair few disagreements. So it was kind of, we knew it was terrible. That was the reason for redoing it. So that was the previous, and then the week following launch of the new one, we found that we had sort of over 3/4 of people agreed or strongly agreed that it was simple and straightforward to check out. It was a huge improvement on what we're going for. The really valuable thing here was to find out what the problems were that people had come across. So that open text field, and to use that to say, well, these people managed to get through and buy their thing, but they encountered these problems. How many people are being put off by that? It was a really good way of triaging post-life support for that platform. Like, what do we need to fix now? What do we need to contextualize? So one of the biggest complaints was, I don't want to give you my telephone number. Why do I have to do that? They needed that information in case something went wrong with the order. So it was just a case of adding a little bit of microcopy just to say, we'll only call you in these specific circumstances. Those complaints fell away. That was fine. So having some sort of tools and processes and making, especially on the user experience side of things, making that a regular habit rather than just something that gets wheeled out occasionally. So that was number 3. Number 4, we got another poll.
We have indeed. There you go. How accurate do you think your Google Analytics data is? Great, good enough, not great, don't know, not applicable. So quick poll there. People are starting to put the questions in, so we are at 40 minutes. So anything for questions for Chris, or generally head down to the Q&A. You'll find it at the top or the bottom of your screen there. So there's the results, I think. There we go. We'll share those.
What have we got?
Great 8%, good enough 43%, not great 18%, don't know 31%. Chris, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for filling that out. So in terms of proper setup of these tools, so one of the most common bits of work that I get to do is, and my team at One Further, is to sort out how those tools are set up. So this is the middle bit of that diagram from that guy with the data being sent to these tools. If these tools aren't set up properly, then again, it's going to hamper decision-making and automation possibilities. So what we're talking about when we're talking about property setup is having useful data. So that was everything I was talking about upstream. So making sure that your website and ticketing systems are giving you good quality, rich, useful data. The number one thing I have is people complaining about Google Analytics and saying, I mean, this looks great, but I don't see what I'm meant to do with this data. I used to have this when I first got into trying to get my head around Google Analytics. I used to stare at it and go, everyone uses this, so it's got to be useful in some way. I just don't get it. And it was only when I realized that it was totally dependent on useful information being sent to it that the penny dropped. And which utterly transformed my view of that particular tool. So collecting useful data. The second thing is tidying it up. Google Analytics is, in the nicest possible way, it's a dumb system. It will just take what it's given. So you need to help it along and tidy up the data. That will go for the how it categorizes traffic sources, how it displays the URLs that it collects, because all sorts of marketing platforms add weird and wonderful stuff to the end of URLs, to various other things. I kind of got bored of this part of my job, so I wrote an article called Improving Data Quality in Google Analytics last year, and now I send this to people instead of doing that particular job myself. So you're very welcome to go there and just follow the steps there to make your data a little bit tidier and useful. And then the third part of that is just sending it to the right places. So people sometimes, so this is going slightly away from website analytics per se, but people sometimes don't realize you can do things like send the product that was bought over to Facebook ads, for example, which allows you to do things like evaluate marketing campaigns based on people who bought the specific thing that you were trying to sell, not just any product or production on your website. If anyone's ever done remarketing campaigns are, you might have someone come to your website who was going to, who wanted to buy a pantomime ticket, and you start serving them adverts for some other show that you happen to have coming up. People I've seen in great numbers clicking that advert and then buying their pantomime tickets. That advert didn't sell the thing that it was meant to sell. Which, if you were sending information about products bought into Facebook, then that would be very evident. So sending that information to the right places is it sounds fairly fundamental, but it's not always the case. Then our fifth one, I think we have another poll for this one, last one of the day.
Yes, I'm here. I was just waiting. I thought it's got to be coming up soon. So here we go. How often do you make decisions based on your website analytics data? Is it daily, weekly, monthly, hardly ever, or not at all, not applicable? Quick vote on this one. How often do you make decisions based on website analytics data? Daily, weekly, monthly? And the Q&A is building up, so if you want to get your question in, get it in there. If you see one that you like the look of, give it a thumbs up as well, because we'll get to those ones first. End of the poll. Let's share those results. How often do you make decisions based on website analytics data? Daily 3%, weekly 13%, monthly 28%, hardly ever 45%, not applicable 11%. Chris, back to you.
I think the figure for hardly ever is telling. So which goes back to what I was saying about the wrong data being in Google Analytics, and that being one of the biggest problems. This used to be the first thing that you saw when you got into Google Analytics, and I would be very confident in saying if anyone on this is doing any sort of reporting up to senior people in their organization, these are probably the big stats that are being shown. The number of page views or the bounce rate or the pages per session. These are all terrible numbers to report. These are not going to tell you what you should be doing on your website. So getting away from this, and it's the same with any of these kinds of tools. And the important thing is to firstly to know what information is being served up by these tools and being kind of familiar with that, but then thinking about what's the actual information that you want to take action on. So I broke what we were talking about down into user experience, marketing performance, and content performance. So if we were looking at those things, these are just a few questions off the top of my head, which are very actionable. Are there broken links that need fixing? How many people are hitting our pages that have a page title of 404 or page not found? That's a job that needs fixing, because that's going to, if we go back to the Natural History Museum picture, that is people trying to walking through doors or trying to get in the lift and just falling down the elevator shaft. That is not a good experience for anyone. I've seen organizations that, one comes to mind that launched a new website and they didn't get their redirects sorted. And we saw that, I think it was about 20% of users were hitting 404 pages. That's terrible. Which pages are loading slowly? There's a report in Google Analytics which will give you a view of ones that are performing very badly, and usually the problem is that someone's uploaded some ridiculously high-res images to that, and that's having a material impact on user experience. It's also come into a website we did some analysis for about this time last year, where the what's on page was hitting the ticketing system's API, not caching any of the data. So every time someone went to that page, it was going and getting a couple of years worth of performance data. It was just insane, and just a badly coded website, and having an impact on people who are trying to find stuff. I talked about percentage of users being shown error messages. And so that's really useful. What can you do to get that down? Because people don't like being shouted at. I've got TLA overload on this one, but pages that have better or worse click-through rates on calls to actions. So every page, if it's a production page or an article or contact, anything with a form on it, has a point to it. You're trying to get someone to do something. If it's a production, you're trying to get them to click on book now. So what percentage of people are clicking on the book now button? If it's an article, you're trying to get them to subscribe in some way or click over to a related product. What percentage of those articles are doing that? That's useful insights. And which features are and aren't being used on production pages? Are you just chucking stuff on because you always have? And have you designed, like the production pages are the single most important page on your website. It's the landing page for most people, the first bite they'll get of it. So making sure that that's performing as strongly as possible is going to be critical. So there are all sorts of other questions that you could be asking about your data. It's making sure that you are coming with the right questions, asking harder questions of what people are doing with your website, and then where necessary, going back upstream and saying, we need this data so that we can find the answers to these things. Maybe it would be a case of setting up some tracking so you've got the number of times something has happened, and Google Analytics is a good place for that. Maybe it's a survey question. You need a pop-up survey to try and get a flavour of how people are responding. Maybe you need to sit and watch someone going through the full customer journey and ask them to explain the choices that they're making at each point. Might even be all of these things. So just wrapping up on this now, we're in quite a funny point at the moment, he says, alluding to the 50-ton elephant in the room. When people start booking tickets, again, we don't want to be putting them off in any way, shape or form. So we want to be helping them get back into our venues and experiencing the art, the performances that is the point of what we'll work on. So these are my 5 things. Better data upstream from the ticketing providers and the web agencies, and in-house making sure that we've got the right tools and processes in-house to be able to collect that data, send it to the right places, and then asking more useful questions of it so that we can start taking action that's actually going to lead to some improvements to the experiences of the people who are coming and interacting with us, and frankly to our organisation's bottom lines as well. So thank you very much for listening to me waffle on and for taking part in the polls. I understand there might be a few questions, so I'm going to see what I can do to answer some of those.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yes, you'll find a Q&A box top or bottom of your screen. Click that and then pop a question there. We've got 8 already in there to get through. I've got a couple myself, but I think actually scanning through this, the list is going to be there. So we tend to go for the ones with the biggest thumbs up, but I can see Kenny's at the top of the pile. I'm going to ignore Kenny for now and go down to the bottom because I've seen a really great one from Ahmed Moma. Hello, good TPC attendee. He asks, are any examples of ticketing systems where you have successfully integrated, especially ones where you have 2 sites? So basically he's talking about the booking site and the information site, because there's a lot of those systems that you go to tickets.myvenue.com. So yes. Any examples of where you're pulling in from 2 of those, Ahmed's asking?
Yes, so actually quite a lot of them, but there are 2, there are broadly, well, there are 3 approaches to integrating ticketing on your site. There is the ones where the ticketing purchase pathway is fully integrated and part and parcel of your own website. We're not talking about that here. Those don't tend to be very common. The usual approaches are either where you have you link over to, so Eventbrite, for example, you want someone to book a ticket on Eventbrite, you send them over to Eventbrite to book the ticket. If you're using, trying to think of some of the ones I've used recently, but I think Testatura, if you're using Tinu or TicketSolve or Audience View, Patron Base, those tend to have a third-party website that you send people over to. Yeah. The tricky bit in Google Analytics needs to be told if someone is moving from one domain to another. It's not a problem. It's just that you need to pass over something to identify a person on the site they're coming from, the site they're going to. Otherwise, it's not too much of a problem. What you do tend to have a problem with sometimes is those third-party systems can sometimes be a little bit funny about putting tracking codes on their sites. I don't know too many ticketing systems who take that view these days, but it's in most cases it's not too much of a problem now. So examples of ticketing systems, everything. The tricky ones are Eventbrite is a little bit funny. But most of the kind of what I would call the most commonly used ones, certainly in the arts and culture sector, the ones I've mentioned and various others, and Spectrix, where you embed it on your page, but usually on a subdomain. They all take care of this stuff properly these days.
Yeah, I think the bit in my work as a consultant, helping people choose ticketing systems, they have changed dramatically, and the ability You know, I remember them 8 years ago where it was a feature to be able to put a Facebook pixel on, a confirmation page, and that's gladly a thing of the past now. A lot more of these ticketing systems are, I think, are far more on board with this. But as you said there in this in that answer, Chris, you know, when we went, and I hold my hands up, I'm a very basics 101 Google Analytics user. So, you know, if the ticket system companies don't know about this stuff or haven't got product people, and I'm not saying they do, but some I think don't, then it's never going to make it into the product itself. So it's an interesting point. I've got to go to the top of the pile. Yep. Kenny McKinnon, hello Kenny in Scotland. It's a contentious one here. We've got to be careful because we've got a lot of system providers on, and a lot of countries as well. Which ticketing systems are currently able to send enhanced data? So give me your top three, because we've got to get through these questions. Give me your top three of who's pushing good data in your experience.
So I know TicketSolve does.
Well done, TicketSolve. They're on.
Otherwise, I think pretty much all the, and I know I'm going to make someone angry here by this. The other ones that I'm aware of don't. It's where people are doing custom stuff. So if you're using Magento for your ticketing front end, which is a bit weird, but I know some people do that, then it tends to be in those kinds of cases. Or WooCommerce tends to be enhanced e-commerce native. Anything where you're crafting it yourself rather than it being sort of a big sort of third-party system.
I won't name the system, but I did my first experience of working with ticketing and analytics, and this was about 6 or 7 years ago. And the first people I thought did it really well, and won't name them, but their product names, when I've written it down here, were like production name underscore, you know, or products Lion King underscore Tuesday 8th March underscore stalls underscore price band A underscore adult. And so, you know, when you look at your top selling products, unless you were all buying the same day, the same area, and the same ticket. So they would do, you know, I think it has evolved. But thanks for that question, Kenny. What else have we got here? We'll ignore Sam because he did a webinar yesterday, so we'll miss him over. Robert Sampson asks, over the long term, do you feel that using agencies to assist in much of your ticketing efforts and data analysis is the best way rather than the internal hire? It's a really interesting question right now. Are we better going to that external without promoting your own services or other people's services? But, you know, do you think we're going this way because it's such a skill now, online data and digital science?
Yeah, I think so. So looking across all the organizations I'm aware of, there are relatively few that have the resource to hire someone in-house. Just from my own experience, like finding, if you look at the salaries of anyone who's doing this kind of stuff, it tends to be a little bit astronomical. So there aren't enough people out there doing this, and so snapping them up is difficult. And they get snapped up by banks and startups and that kind of thing. I know lots of large museums who tend to have larger in-house teams looking after their digital stuff, and they're more likely to hire a digital analyst to look at the kind of the website side of things. It's much more common to have someone doing sort of data and audience insight on the marketing side of things, and they're mostly looking at CRM rather than website front ends. It's totally going to be it's going to be down to just how much money is your website making you, and does it do the costs stack up of having someone on staff who can find improvements for you? Can you make it part of someone's job? Is it something that people can just kind of bite off little snackable bits and improve over time? But the more common approach is that there's some organizations, there's someone usually quite junior who's got their teeth into analytics and is keen and enthusiastic. I always tell people, it used to be, if you worked in an office and you knew how to work it used to be the fax machine, but if you knew how to work the printer, you kind of made yourself indispensable. These days, if you can get a tune out of Google Analytics or some other tool, then that seems to be like witchcraft to some people. So if you can do that, then it's probably not too bad for you.
Yeah, the danger is though, Chris, so I go back to one of your earlier slides, is the fact I can log into Google Analytics and print out a graph showing I had 10,000 page impressions yesterday. If they don't book anything, whoop-de-doo, you haven't, but if you're bored, think that's great, because we only used to get 7,000 on the old website. So I think there's a thing there that I think a lot of analytics, anecdotally, and we look at the poll results of people who are giving false positives, that they're doing really well. I mean, these web sessions we're doing here, our web traffic has blown up on TPC website, but it looks like we've got a really terrible bounce rate because people land on the schedule page and then they go to book the Zoom pages to book. That's a ticketing page. So our web stats have gone completely crazy, but I'm looking at them with some kind of analysis saying that's not actually that bad. It's because they're actually booked, and we've got the events set up as well, so we can track them. But if you're just printing out stats that are meaningless, then I think we could have some people who are running or giving a false glimmer of hope to some of their teams. Surely,
it's a good point. Is having that understanding the wider business context of all this stuff and understanding what matters, what doesn't, and what levers can be pulled to improve things, and how to spot that.
Right, he's got 10 thumbs up, so we have to go to his question now. Sam Biscoe asks, I'm building a new website for my organisation. It looks very nice as well, Sam. What are your pro tips, you're officially a pro, to make sure you make the most of it?
So making the most out of a new website, I think, so looking after so in terms of the initial build, I mean, when someone launches a website, it is basically a bundle of assumptions that you're putting out into the world. And it's only when it's launched that you can start to get feedback on what doesn't work. So firstly, just having an open mind as to what were your best guesses and where you were going off intuition the first time round. Trying to actively find things that are broken or not being used. In-person user research is always an eye-opener for that kind of thing. I've been involved in testing projects just before websites have gone live and uncovered some huge gotchas that when your head's down and you're concentrating on building a thing, you've got blinkers on and you're not going to be having the same experience as 99% of the people using that thing. So, and you come into it with a different context and all this stuff. So trying to break out of that bubble and being open to what other people are saying. And also, and this is where box office staff are invaluable, because they're the ones that are picking up the phone when people have got frustrated with the website. When I worked for a web design agency, it always used to be, you'd hate getting the all the feedback from the box office team saying people don't know how to do this, that, and the other. Because you read it and you go, but it's easy. But then if it was that easy, you wouldn't be getting that feedback.
Is it common sense? There we go. We're going to whiz on. We've got a couple more here. And I'm going to whiz through quickly. A lot of thank yous, which I'm just going to get rid of. But they say thank you, Chris. And they had to jump off because they're on other meetings. User answered question from Cherry, who asked about e-commerce data and custom dimensions. Lewis has answered that one, talking about how they're feeding the start and end time of sessions through to Google Data Studio, so they can see kind of the average length of time transactions taken. So that's good to see a question being answered there by other people, which is good. Oliver Marcus asks, we are sending product data back into Facebook, but can't find it to evaluate against. Where does it go? Will Greg answers that the Facebook Ads Manager's got an awful UI. Head to Events Manager, and you should find it under your pixel. I think we need to have a session on maybe that kind of Facebook kind of data. Last one from Lewis.
Just to answer that one quickly for Oliver.
Okay.
And also, hi Oliver, how are you doing? So the most useful place to use that is for creating what are called custom conversions. And also using that data when you're setting up remarketing audiences. So if you say we've got I don't know, if you've got Tom York doing a gig at somewhere like the Roundhouse, for example, then you might want to retarget people who've been to that page, but then you can add a condition saying if someone's bought a ticket which has a product name of that includes Tom York, then don't use it. Then don't take them out of that audience. So it's useful in places like that to contextualize remarketing in that kind of way.
Superb. Two, and then we're going to wrap it up. Lewis Crompton asks, what does Nirvana look like in terms of data points that ticketing companies can provide now and over the next few years? Interesting data points, not necessarily which companies are better. So what data are we going to need to look at?
So I would say, so some of the stuff that I mentioned when I was talking about the metadata on pages, so things like the on-sale status. So if you wanted to know, just give me a report on everything that's on sale at the moment. Doing that in Google Analytics would take you far too long to pull together a list of every relevant URL. Whereas if you were sending that data in as a custom dimension, then you would pull that report in seconds. It's a slightly tricky one to answer because it is going to depend to some extent on the organisation and the size of the organisation, who has what reporting needs. But that's why one of the jobs in this is the kind of the stakeholder thing, where you go to people and say, what do you need to do your job better, and what's going to be useful to you, and then trying to get that for them. There's some stuff that cuts across everyone. So things like, so on sale status, is the person looking at this website a member? If they're logged in, do we know how much they've spent over time? That would be useful context, not to stalk them or anything, but maybe we bid extra on our remarketing for those people. Or how do we segment our biggest fans and see what stuff they're looking at on the website? So yeah, I really didn't want to say it depends, but it sort of does.
Okay, I'm going to wrap the last two up into one question, which is about, one's talking about, ticketing system and, that not being able to put, like I said, not being able to put pixels or tracking codes. And the other one's saying they're from someone who worked with external organizations and they hit roadblocks about privacy concerns. So can you just give us a nice soundbite or some ideas or tips on moving that along about, when people cite privacy concerns or other things of why, tracking codes can't be embedded or pixels can't be embedded, etc.
Yeah, so those kinds of restrictions are either going to be driven by people who are being very cautious from a tech security point of view, which is why they might not want to put pixels on a transaction page. That sounds like a huge cop-out to me in this day and age, with digital marketing being what it is and how important it is to be able to evaluate the quality of your marketing. Like that might even be a deal breaker for me, and might find myself walking, depending on how much you're spending on your digital marketing. If you can't evaluate it properly, then that's going to be it's going to be a big cost. That's not necessarily realistic for everyone. In terms of the privacy, that is something that's complicating this a lot more, and there are all sorts of developments in that area. A lot of the data that I've been talking about it's not tracking, it's only tracking individuals in the sense that we can tell them apart, so we can count one person distinct from another, or be able to know that someone who entered on it from a certain traffic source bought a certain thing. We don't care who they are, what color hair they have, what size trousers, and all this kind of thing. We are just using it to try and improve improve that user journey and that user experience in an aggregated kind of way. So aggregated data tends to be a little less worrying from a privacy point of view. If you're, I tend to be of the opinion, if you can, like, using the least data possible is good. Using that data is the new oil metaphor from years back. Oil is a horrible, messy substance that's difficult to contain and can get everywhere, and you don't want more of it than you can work with. So,
Chris, how are you doing for time? Because I've got a couple more questions. Are you okay for time?
yeah, I'm going nowhere.
Right, okay, so we're going to get these questions. I know, well, so it seems people leaving. We've just mentioned the P word there, and I can see he's actually on tomorrow. We've got Andrew Sharp from Securis, who is talking about ticketing from home, and he's really going to be touching on a lot of privacy issues, so it's a plug for him there. If you have got a nip off, thanks for coming. The more sessions are being added daily to the TPC site, so ticketingprofessionals.co.uk, if you register directly with Zoom, if you head there, there's some other sessions. But 3 more questions come in here. Let's have a quick look here. Kwame, I pronounced that correctly, who did, I think Kwame is the one from one of the countries on there. Seems the focus is on websites. My company also sells tickets on our app. What's your input on tracking there?
So, fascinatingly, from my point of view, the Google Analytics last year announced a whole new version of Google Analytics that's it's kind of Google Analytics 3, if you like, and they're called web and app properties because it's recognizing that plenty of companies interact with people across websites and apps, and that they needed to change the way that that they handle data so that they can reflect that in the reporting. So app tracking is a little bit different. The website tracking works based on the way that people just when someone loads a page with some new content, it's a fairly easy way to track how someone's progressing through a website. The principle isn't too different for apps. In some ways, the data you get from apps is better because quite often you're asking people to log in on those. So you avoid some of the complications you get with website tracking where you don't really know if someone's using different browsers or different devices, you don't know if they're the same person or not. So it actually makes the data a bit more accurate from that point of view. But it is going to be a bit more dependent on, you have to customize the tracking a little bit more so that you're tracking screens rather than pages. Those screens don't tend to, you're quite often dealing with dynamic content in slightly more nuanced ways where maybe part of the screen is showing, or you're just showing new options or questions to the user. So there's a lot more, there tends to be a bit more custom tracking that needs to go into those, but there is the possibility for more accurate data. So, and that model is the one that's actually coming back into website design quite a bit more with the newer frameworks like Vue, React, and those that work on the basis of single page applications. They're much more appy in nature. So if you're on, so those two worlds are going to come closer together, if anything.
Superb, superb. We still got quite a lot of people here actually, so obviously hanging on your every word, Chris. Robert in the US says he appreciates the parallels and different ways of looking at this and being put in this forum. Thank you very much. We do have quite a lot of people from different countries and US and Canada I can see on today as well, so great to have you here. It's why we did actually put a lot of these in the afternoon so you guys and non guys can join us. Ahmed asks, this is a good one because I'm crazy goal fanatic on Google Analytics. What are your top 5 Google Analytics goals to set up for a ticketing venue?
So I tend to be quite minimalist with my goals. So just to explain for people, so a goal, you can tell Google Analytics that if someone looks at a particular page or interacts with your website in a particular way, like they fill out a form or download a PDF or some such, you can flag that up as a goal and tell Google Analytics that was what we were trying to get people to do, and we're delighted that people have done that. So if you're an e-commerce heavy website, then actually a transaction is what you're trying to get people to do. And so you don't really need to set that up as a goal as well, because you can use the transaction data to use that as to to see how well your various traffic sources have done. But if you've got stuff that people can do on your website, which would be brilliant if they did it, but it's not transactional, that's where goals kind of come into their own and shine. So
join the mailing list, that kind of thing,
yeah,
Chris, is that?
so my standard ones tend to be, I do set up purchases as a goal, but my standard ones are any purchase, and then individually purchase a ticket, purchase merchandise, a membership, or make a donation. Sign up to the mailing list, complete a contact form. If they do a lot of, if they've got a large educational department, maybe then if someone downloads a teaching resource, they're usually PDFs. So that someone can, in terms of forms, there might be a venue hire form, or download a venue hire brochure. Those are the major categories. What I don't do is, so you've got a limited number of them in Google Analytics, so it tends to work at this kind of, it's best to do them as kind of broad brush categories of things that you want people to do on your website. What I wouldn't do is things like, if you're selling, if you've got an event next month, then setting that up as a goal. Because if you do that, if you've got a few a month, you'll run out of goals really quickly. So just doing those tends to be enough to be able to get some context into the rest of the reports around Google Analytics. You can also feed those into Google Ads and use them as conversions in Google Ads as well.
Excellent. Well, with that, I think we've finally got to the end of that. So thank you very much for those hanging on for these Q&A. Again, big plug for Andrew Sharp tomorrow, 3 o'clock. Katie Rains on Friday. If you're into audiences, you should be on that session. Some fascinating learnings there. And next week, a very digital kind of week we got. We start off with Brian Healy from Untitled. He and I are doing a bit of a panel on things, picking out stories we think we should learn digitally from this crisis, and then James Bagley from Made Media on Tuesday. Thank you very much, Chris. We were trying to get you at TPC for ages. We have to settle for a webinar, but thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone.